Welcome everybody to the plenary session on pandemic and democracy. And I am delighted to have with me here to talk about the impact that this global pandemic has had on society, on democracy, and on our psychological health, with some wonderful speakers from across the world and from very different perspectives. So it will be a very exciting debate. We will be hearing today from Monsignor Marcelo Sánchez Sorondo, who is the Chancellor of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences and the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. We have Magdalena Adamovich, member of the European Parliament and member of the board of Reimagine Europa. We have Jeffrey Sachs, economist, academic, public policy analyst. And we have Ms. Christina Stump, who's head of media convergence and social media for DG Connect. She will be sitting in instead of Roberto Viola, Director General of DG Connect, who unfortunately last minute got a previous commitment he couldn't change. To start off this debate, I would like to give the floor to Jeffrey Sachs. You have this global perspective and have been very vocal on talking about a lot of these points. So maybe you would like to introduce the theme and what you see as the key challenges and opportunities for the development of a digital society post-COVID-19.
Can you hear me? Yes, good. Thank you very much. What an honor to be together. Of course, we would all prefer to be in Venice together, but we'll do that next year, I hope. But this year online together is also extremely gratifying and very valuable. No doubt this pandemic has pushed us into the digital age much faster than we were already and inevitably heading. So we have become digital denizens relentlessly during these months. And we're learning a lot, and we're learning the problems. I think the most basic fact, of course, is that the digital world only includes a little more than half of the world's population right now. So this is probably the single greatest drama. This pandemic requires digital use for our daily lives, for staying connected with people, for doing work in a large proportion of cases in our societies, for getting news from government, for being able to access public services, for having our children in school, for seeing a doctor. In other words, being online is a basic part of citizenship right now. And I think the most stark fact is that this means that we are effectively disenfranchising almost half of the world's population, and we don't have really a plan to do better. I'm engaged in many processes at the UN, the Broadband Commission, with the Secretary General, with also initiatives like the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, the Lancet COVID-19 Commission, where we recognize this fundamental challenge everywhere, but problems in our world are not getting sorted out very much by governments. And when markets or businesses, I should say, because it's not markets, it's a few.
Video's not on.
My video's not on? Sure, it's on. Yes. Okay, thank you. So when businesses don't solve these problems, they're not getting solved right now. And we're entering an even more complicated period where we are dividing up the internet willfully by the US trying to divide the world between the China-linked internet and the US technology world, which is adding even to more complications. And Europe is trying to sort out standards in all of this. It's the only region of the world actually trying to make standards of privacy and online. So suffice it to say, on the one side, digital technologies have proven their essential nature, I would say, in fighting the epidemic itself, in maintaining services and information. And yet, where this is failing, it's failing very, very seriously. Maybe I'll just open by leaving that on the table for our discussion without belaboring the point more, and other speakers will introduce their themes, and then we'll come back for a group discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff. I thought that the perspective that you brought on the impact of inequality in particular is very relevant. We often see things as, you know, the bigger challenges in terms of our own mental health, maybe, without realizing the much deeper consequences that this has for a big part of the world and for a big part of the population. I also, another point that you mentioned that I'd like to bring forward afterwards in the discussion is this constant focus on the nationalistic aspects and this kind of competition aspect when it comes to these issues. And obviously we can see it now in general with the COVID crisis. There's a constant talk about who got the vaccine and who developed the vaccine, as opposed to thinking of it as humanity versus bigger problems. And I find that very interesting and would be curious to explore a little bit today how much is media ecosystem and the debates that we have that linking to this polarization and blocking us from actually uniting as a species instead. So with these thoughts in mind, I would like to give the floor to Magdalena Adamovic, the member of the European Parliament and a strong contributor to many of these issues, having been the co-rapporteur presenting a report on these issues just a couple of weeks ago or months ago, depending on your count. So Magdalena, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much for inviting me for this panel, and that I will have possibility to express the timely and highly relevant issues. So I believe that democracy, we believe that democracy in the countries of European Union was something obvious. We believe that our European democracy was built on an unbreakable foundation. We believe in comfortable conviction and even in a confidence that democracy would defend itself in spite of increasingly visible attacks. Today, in many places in Europe, we are wondering not how to protect democracy, but how to return to it. We have taken it for granted that regardless of current attacks and long-term strategies, the overturning democracy, the very attributes of democracy will prevent us from losing it. And these attributes are the real separation of powers, the independence of judiciary, the rights of minorities, the subsidiarity of power and the broadest possible self-governance, the apolitical nature of state administration, as well as many others seemingly obvious conditions. However, for democracy not only to function well, but to exist in general, free and independent media are perhaps the most vital. I will repeat what I said in the European Parliament, as Erika mentioned, when adopted the resolution on the media freedom on the basis of my report. A vote cast out of hatred, out of lack of information, or on the basis of disinformation, even truly counted, will never be a democratic choice. It is, at most, a formal caricature of it. That is the reason and purpose for which the media must be independent. The aim is for society to have reliable information about the situation in their countries and in the world, so that political competition can reach out to voters with its own agenda and with criticism of those in power. In an undemocratic state, the media become a machine of government propaganda. They are used not for informative purpose, but to falsify reality, to manipulate consignuses, and to combat political competition, among other things, by fabricating false accusations or assessments which are not related to reality. Today, by means of lies and hatred, power is gained or maintained in many places in the world, even the European Union as well. I would argue that the pandemic has not created new, previously unknown threats to democracy. Without mercy and with threatening consequences, it reminds us how fragile our democracy is to attack and manipulation. A pandemic is like a great acid test for our social, political, and economic system. It is a moment when our democracy is put on trial. We have seen the power of manipulation and lies, disinformation, and the lack of reliable information. The chaos of the pandemic was exploited by conspiracy theorists and anarchists, probably also by the series of foreign countries that wish to destabilize the European Union. However, they could only do so because we have so far underestimated the importance of the access to reliable information. We have underestimated the destructive impact of disinformation. We have underestimated the power of social media and the virtual world in building public opinion, in this case for negative purposes. The pandemic showed that the virtual world in which we spend a large part of our lives, also before the pandemic, is unprepared to sustain democracy. Before the pandemic, we treated the virtual world as a parallel entity, a little excluded from the rules of democracy. Some people use it for political purposes with more or less success. It was used to run election campaigns, to reach out to voters with their targeted propaganda. However, it is my impression, or even my contribution, that we did not take the virtual world seriously enough. Nobel Prize winner Lech Wałęsa's words that democracy lags behind technology have come true. The pandemic showed this very clearly. The virtual world has developed further, but far beyond what the average citizen needs for entertainment, work, study, and information. Nevertheless, it is still insufficiently developed for democracy to function and even to survive. This has recently been proved in Poland. The illegal decision of the politicized Constitutional Court, which tightened the already exceptionally restrictive abortion law in Poland, sparkled a massive protest of the women's strikes. The virtual world turned out to be too small, too narrow, too weak, and too inexpressive to convey public protest. In the midst of the pandemic, with an increasing number of infections and death, and in a fear of death, hundreds of thousands of Polish women and men took to the streets to protest. Freedom I love and understand. Freedom I cannot give up is a line of well-known song in Poland, which best reflects what was happening and is still happening in the Polish streets in the middle of the pandemic. What I mean is to make all us aware of how the virtual world is insufficient to defend democracy and how effective it is at destroying it. Therefore, we cannot continue to treat the virtual world as a parallel entity which can be governed by its own rules. All the more so as its development to date showed that it can be used for anti-democratic purposes. The paradox then is that the seemingly most democratic environment is being used to annihilate democracy. In addition to improving health system, integrating European health policy, increasing the effectiveness of the emergency systems, and better international cooperation, I would like the lesson from the pandemic to be that the virtual world is an integral part of our democracy, where democracy is protected and not sabotaged. We need tools to improve democracy, to make it not make it a space of tribal warfare. We need tools of truth, not lies. We need a Noah Ark for our democracy, if more disasters were to become. So for my introduction, I would like to stop now and then discuss it later on.
Thank you very much, Magdalena, for this very powerful speech and a lot of very important points that you made. In particular, I love the ode to freedom that I think that we sometimes, and at the moment, I think with the talk about hate speech and blocking disinformation sometimes is being curtailed as well. And the fact that democracy lags behind technology, and we really need to see this as one unity. Sorry, that's an ambulance in the back. That was not a reference on the paper. But I would like to now give the floor for the introductory comment of Christina Stump from DG Connect. Do you agree with what has been said so far, and what is your experience, having been to some extent in the trenches this past year in dealing with the impact of the pandemic on digital and vice versa? Christina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Indeed, I agree with several of the points raised by the previous panelists. Indeed, as also stressed by Jeffrey, technology and in particular connectivity has helped to keep our economies and societies to go through the pandemic. And this is also thanks to the fact that today, thankfully, 78% of the households are already connected to broadband, and that 4G covers almost all of Europe. And I think this was really very important to get through the pandemic in a better way than in earlier times. Also, from the Commission's point of view, it's very important to stress that even during even more through it, people are entitled to technology that they can trust. That's also why the Commission has published early this year, even before the pandemics, the digital strategy. These are particular pillar dedicated to ensure that technology functions in an open, democratic, and sustainable way. Yeah? And we have also recently adopted several initiatives in this respect, including 2 important action plans adopted just a few days ago that have been probably mentioned by previous speakers. So the European Democracy Action Plan and the European Media and Audiovisual Action Plan. These two action plans contain actions on several of the areas already mentioned in this panel, such as the European Democracy Action Plan contains important action points regarding elections, regarding strengthening media freedom and pluralism, fighting disinformation, which is indeed an important topic to that I will come a little bit later more specifically, and also to contribute to a society where we have empowered citizens who can also approach information in the digital society in a more critical and informed way. Also, the European Media and Audiovisual Action Plan that we have adopted also beginning of December contains important measures to help the audiovisual and media sector in Europe that have also significantly suffered during this crisis. If we only think about cinemas, I think I don't need to go into the details. That's why also there we contain important actions that help the audiovisual sector to weather the storm of the pandemics and also to transform to the post-pandemic world and remain competitive in this regard. I also wanted to stress that it's important that heads of state and government have committed to invest at least 20% of the funds under the Recovery and Resilience Facility in the digital transition. So this is also a very important message. And this is indeed crucial as in our understanding, new technology can bring 14% of GDP growth by 2030 in a period where I think this is really a crucial point. Before I turn a bit more specifically to the issue of disinformation, let me also stress that European digital policy and investment in this upcoming difficult area will be guided by a set of very important principles. One is promoting European values when designing and deploying digital technologies. Also to ensure that this is really also deeply in line with the European values of democracy. Also, it is very important to keep in mind the digital divide. So according to certain figures, 42% of Europeans still lack basic digital skills. So it's important to watch out also for this part of the population. And it is also important that Europe also has a strategic technological autonomy in the future. When we think about supercomputing, microelectronics, connectivity, data, and AI, just one of the important topics. And of course, last but not least, it's also key that technology is also aware of the greening of our societies. So basically, that we use these also to fight climate change and also reduce carbon footprint of digital technologies. Turning more particular to the area of disinformation that has been already highlighted by Magdalena, it is indeed clear that this pandemic has also put more spotlight on one of the most prominent challenges of the digital age, the fight against mis and disinformation. I think all of us have encountered these on various social media platforms. And with the rise of COVID-19, we have indeed witnessed an unprecedented infodemic. And this flood of false and misleading information that we are facing everywhere on the internet and social media. I think this threat is very clear. I don't have to go much more on the detail. I would like to rather outline very briefly what we are doing in this regard at the European Commission. One thing that we are doing specifically related to COVID-19 related disinformation, which includes also the conspiracy theories or also dis and misinformation about vaccines. We have there issued a communication last year, and platforms are reporting about their actions taken in this regard. So just today, a few hours ago, we have published the reports of the signatories of the Code of Practice, such as Facebook, Google, Mozilla, Twitter, Microsoft, and TikTok, about what they are doing in this regard to fight disinformation. And know that hopefully an effective and safe vaccine is, or more even, are available soon. We are also putting a spotlight on actions related to vaccines disinformation. More broadly on the disinformation front, as probably already explained previously, the European Action Plan has a very important pillar in this regard, where we will issue guidance next year on how to step up the fight against disinformation on the basis of Code of Practice. We will strengthen the Code of Practice. That will also turn into a co-regulatory instrument. Also, last but not least, I want to mention that also in the European Democracy Action Plan, the emphasis is also on an informed public, because disinformation is indeed a challenge. There are several ways how to fight it, but one important component is also the informed citizen. And we therefore also included several actions regarding media literacy to help in this regard. So that would be a little bit in the nutshell about our actions in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I hope we'll have some time to come into some of these points afterwards. But I would like to give the floor now to Monsignor Marcelo Sánchez Sorondo. We had a very interesting conversation earlier this week about the impact, or what we can see in terms of the philosophical implications of this pandemic on society. So, Monsignor, the floor is yours.
Good morning or good afternoon, or I don't know, good night to everybody, especially my friends, Jeff and the others. Of course, it's a very important reflection about democracy today in the situation of pandemic. But it's clear that, as say the people to have intervention before, that the pandemic shows a real crisis in democracy, because fundamentally for two things that was before the pandemic, but in the pandemic we see more clear. The first is the more important governors, some of the more important, not believe in sciences. So this is terrible, because if they don't believe in science to the description of climate change or the warning, global warning, that is all the community of science agree and was posed by the people of our academy. So for me, it's a real terrible concern if the government not believe in science, and not believe in science in the question of global change, but not believe in science also in the question of illness. So this is terrible. So of course we need that the politicians find the common good with information of science. It's not the scientists need to be the politician. This is not. But they need to be informed by science. And this is a real thing that is impossible to understand. Because, you know, for example, the question of climate change, but it's the same of the question of the pandemic. The Pope followed the indication of the Academy of the Pope, Academy that I am the Chancellor. Consider the more important document that the category is encyclica, the name is Laudato Si, that the situation is critical, and the situation is critical by the use of oil and carbon in the end, because this, and that is to say, is critical because the action of the human action to use this. So we need to change. And he put this in a very central document because for the point of view of the faith, we need to be steward of the creation of the planet, and the description of the situation of the planet is given by scientists. So, and a right to have an agreement in Paris, and after some of the more important presidents not follow this, of course, this is terrible for the democracy because what is not a serious democracy. So it's the same for the pandemic. If they not consider the things that say the scientific community, this is really dramatic situation, and you see the consequence. This is one thing, but to really work the democracy, for all the thinkers about democracy, we need ethic. We need virtue. It's impossible to have democracy also for Aristotle, also for Plato, if we don't have friendship, if we don't have concordia. They say social friendship, that is, the name is concordia. So it's absolutely important to have friendship. And to have friendship, we need to have dialogue. And we need to understand that anyone have all the truth, all the good. We need a collaboration. And if we don't do this in the internals of the country, but also in the international, in the global way, we can have real democracy, because the fundament of democracy is the responsibility and the conscience of each one. It's impossible to have a police to follow each one of the person. It's not possible. For example, in my country, Argentina, of course, the president was very serious from the beginning and make a very serious lockdown. But the people is completely indisciplined, not have any discipline. So it's impossible to put a policeman near to 8 person in the country. It's impossible. So we need to have virtue. We need to have responsibility. So we need to restart with the love of truth and the love of good and the love of justice, that are the real fundamental virtues of democracy and responsibility. And I want to say one thing more, and after we can have other intervention. We need also to have virtue for Aristotle and for all the tradition of the Western, not for many people of the modernity, but for the classics, also Hegel, also Kant. We need to be open to the transcendent, because if we not have openness to the transcendent, we really not have virtue. So, and this is important of the meaning of religion, and not all religion, but especially the Christian religion, because, as you know, the essence of the new commandment of Christ is just friendship, is just love each other. So, and also the virtue, the sacrifice, and the love, that is the love in the good of the other people, the love in the truth of the other people. So, and I think also that we don't have this openness, because as many times said the Pope, many people present a unique model where not consider nothing about this transcendent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for raising all these very important issues and the importance of these values. And you talked about social friendship and dialogue echoing also some of the words that Magdalena Adamovic said on the importance of moving beyond hatred. And I think it lives in a little bit to how we have built the ecosystem that we're currently working on. I mean, communication and media is at the center of how we work as human beings, about how we construct our visions of reality, about how we see where we're going. So there's a lot of challenges there, especially in a media ecosystem that thrives on aggression, that thrives on like fights, and that actually pushes in the opposite direction. So I think this is very question, how do we center all of these and find a model? But I'd like to pass the floor to Jeff, because I think that he will have many comments to say on these different points that have been said.
Thank you. And in fact, with apologies, I have to leave presently to give a lecture in another Zoom. So I will wrap up. But all of this points to the conflict that we have the technologies and the science to solve these problems, but we lack the common decency, the attention to the common good and the virtues to do that and to define the common good. This is exactly the point of the pandemic. We have nearly 300,000 deaths in the United States in, quote, the name of freedom. The freedom to not wear face masks, the false freedom to congregate, as if this is the kind of freedom that we want, the freedom to spread a pandemic, the freedom of fake news. So I think we are confronting a crisis of values, as Monsignor just said, and I think it relates very much to the areas that we heard from our other participants, from Magdalena and from Christina, that we're basically with tools in hand, but governance behind. And then in many cases, government, in my country, government was actually the enemy to the common good, because we had a psychopathic president who is he's still a psychopath, but he's no longer president soon. And this is where we face the real crisis to define the common good. And this, I think, by putting the values up front, we have the chance to orient the dialogue, because we can solve the problems technically, but we can't solve the problems if we can't agree as human beings on what the problem is. And there is where we have fallen far short. So I just wanted to close with a hearty agreement to all that has been said, which is that fundamentally this is a governance challenge. And we always have two kinds of visions of governance. We have Machiavelli's vision that governance is power struggle, and we have Aristotle's vision that governance is for the common good. And that is the only one that can save us at this moment. So I think that the technologists have done their job by helping us with the tools, but we have to use them not to kill each other, but to save each other. So I just wanted to make that quick reflection. But I apologize that I have to leave imminently because I'm expected on another line. So thank you very much to everybody for the chance to be with you.
Well, thank you very much, Jeffrey, for being here with us. I know it's a very busy agenda, and I would like to thank all the speakers. It's now 4 o'clock, and I know we all have a coffee break, but I would love to be able to just sit here and discuss these issues much more. I think that many of the points that Jeffrey mentioned here at the end are worth a whole hour of discussion, and links into obviously what both Christina Stump said, what Monsignor Sánchez Sorondo said, and what MEP Magdalena Adamovic were mentioning. I would like to end this chat, and I may give an inspiration based on all the different things we've heard here today about the nearly existential question that we have before us. And Manuel Castel said earlier that right now we are sowing the embryos of the future. We are now deciding who we're going to be as societies, and it's really important what we choose to be in this. I think there is, and it had been not because of the from this crisis, but starting from the financial crisis, a distrust in the system that we have, and a request from citizens all across the world. So we are seeing this in South America, in Asia, in the United States, in Europe, for a different way of thinking about things, for a more social world. And I do think that the tools of the digital have within them the opportunity to do this if we can use them right. So I fully agree with what Jeffrey said. It's a governance issue now. It's about thinking, how do we use these tools to stop hatred, to promote friendship, and to help to engage citizens and to build a different society, and a society that we would be proud of. And I'm very happy for all the work that you're doing at the European Commission, that you're doing at the European Parliament, and that leading thinkers are doing across the world to try to figure this out. And I think that that's the biggest challenge and how we need to see this. This is a difficult question because we do not know where we're going. We cannot copy the past because everything has changed. We've moved into a new world with the digital, and it's a little bit like, and I'd like to mention here, I also studied philosophy as a basis. So for me, when I read the really great philosophers, the ones that make you change your mind, change the way you think, what we're asking society to do now as a whole is to change paradigm, change the way they think, and that's really hard. So this is going to be a while, but I think we need to put all our efforts into this because this is such an existential and defining moment